This will be a little bit different. There won't be as much lecture notes as there will video. We will talk about this particular subtopic and topic, World War II, Part 4. And then we're going to show you a video on Okinawa, the Battle of Okinawa, which we'll talk about today. We'll show you a video on the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we'll show you a video from the people that actually did the dropping, their interviews. And then we're going to show you a video on the 1940s. So we won't have any test of any kind this week. We'll lecture and watch video and lecture and watch video, and have a test probably towards the middle or end of next week. So we're talking about World War II, Part 4, the death of President Roosevelt, more Pacific victories, and the end of World War II. That's what we're talking about on this test material. And our first subtopic is going to be President Roosevelt's death. President Roosevelt's death. Now, we've gone back and forth, and we kind of finished the war in Europe before we finished the war in the Pacific, but there were some things going on at the same time. Remember, the war in Europe didn't end until May of 1945, and we really haven't got to May of 1945 in the Pacific yet, right? So you got to keep that in mind. But what a lot of people don't understand is President Roosevelt didn't live to see the end of World War II in either Europe or the Pacific, because he's going to die a month before VE Day and 4 months before our victory in the Pacific, or VJ Day. Okay? So he doesn't live to see the end of World War II at all. And his death was really a shock. I mean, he obviously, I think, had been worn out by his vast responsibilities during World War II, but it isn't like this is expected. So on April 12th of 1945, President Roosevelt dies unexpectedly in Warm Springs, Georgia. So, again, Roosevelt doesn't live to see the end of the war in Europe or the end of the war in the Pacific, and his death is a surprise. He dies just 3 months into his 4th term on April 12th of 1945. He dies in Warm Springs, Georgia. And all the people all across the United States were stunned by his death. It was not expected. And unlike today, when all of your television channels would all be turned to the death of the president and celebrating the memory of their life, all we had at that time was radio. So all the radio broadcast stations canceled their everyday broadcasts and dedicated all of their time to the news on President's death and his memory. Now, this is where I think history really takes an interesting turn. After Roosevelt's death, little-known Senator Harry S. Truman from Missouri all of a sudden assumes the presidency, and with the presidency, what else does he assume? World War II. This guy, you think about it, was only in office as vice president for like 3 months, because he was the last vice presidential candidate under Roosevelt. So this guy is thrown into the fire, and I think probably takes on the biggest responsibility possibly in American history. And we've talked about the decision he will eventually make in dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But you have a pretty novice man as President of the United States right now, in Harry S. Truman. So Roosevelt doesn't live to see VE Day, dies a month before. He obviously doesn't live to see VJ Day, victory over Japan, at the end of the war, because he dies 4 months before that. And it will be Harry Truman who now will be responsible, right, to lead us to victory in World War II. Okay, that's going to take us to a really interesting subtopic, which I'm going to lecture about today for a short period of time. Then I'm going to show you a video, and that was the Allied victory at Okinawa. Allied victory at Okinawa. Unbelievable story here, I think. First of all, does anybody remember how far Iwo Jima was from mainland Japan? 750 miles. Okinawa is about 300 miles from homeland Japan. And the Japanese strategy at Okinawa is not going to be to win a military victory, because they know they can't. Their goal is to put so much destruction upon Allied forces or American forces and make it so bloody that the Americans will turn away and walk away and not invade the mainland. Okay? So they're willing to sacrifice, are they not? These are Japanese soldiers that fight to the death. Okay? So the whole Japanese strategy at Okinawa is not going to be to win a military victory. It's to inflict so much damage and blood that the Americans simply walk off the island and say, oh, this is a bad idea to invade Japan. That's their entire philosophy on this thing. Now, the island of Okinawa was 8 miles wide and 70 miles long. 8 miles wide and 70 miles long. So, on April 1st of 1945, April 1st of 1945, the largest amphibious invading force in world history storms the Japanese island of Okinawa. On April 1st of 1945, the largest amphibious invading force in world history storms the Japanese island of Okinawa. Again, just 300 miles from the Japanese mainland. Now I want you to picture this in your mind. This American naval invasion, kiddos, was 8 miles wide. 8 miles of ships wide coming at Okinawa. 1,500 ships. 500,000 American soldiers. This is an unbelievable amphibious invasion of an island that's just 8 miles wide and 70 miles long. Again, the American naval invasion was 8 miles wide, consisted of 1,500 battleships and 500,000 soldiers. Now, here's even an interesting scenario to that. Prior to this invasion, the 3 months prior to the invasion, you know what American battleships did outside of Okinawa? Pounded shells into that island for 3 months, trying to soften them up for this invasion, along with air attacks by airplanes. They bombarded this island for 3 months prior to invasion, hoping to soften it up a little bit. Okay? Hoping to soften it up a little bit. How many Japanese were defending Okinawa? Approximately 100,000. Approximately 100,000. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Now I want you to picture this in your mind. We don't have that many kids today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 times 80 would be what? What's 15 times 80%? About 12? Okay. When these American soldiers, sailors, went into the Battle of Okinawa, they were expecting 80% casualties hitting the beaches, just like at Normandy and Iwo Jima. Okay? That means that 12 out of 15 kids in here would be killed during this initial attack. And as you're going into this battle at Okinawa, are you not wondering whether you're going to be one of the 80% or one of the lucky 20? So they're expecting 80% casualties as the Marines hit the beach, just like they did at Normandy and just like they did at Iwo Jima. Okay? Here was the thing that was so weird. You know how much resistance they met when they hit the beaches? Zero. Zero. These American soldiers and sailors, thinking they would have their last day on Earth, are incredibly surprised, is because as American soldiers and sailors make an assault on that island, they met no resistance whatsoever. They were expecting 80% casualties and got zero, storming the island. And what are they doing? They're going, some soldiers even said, are we on the right island here? Seriously. Because they couldn't believe it. And they just simply marched and marched and marched, looking for what? The enemy. They're not getting any resistance at all. Now, I don't have this on your ID sheet, so I'll write it down. The man that commanded American soldiers at Okinawa was General Simon Buckner Jr. Simon Buckner Jr. And he absolutely couldn't believe that they faced no resistance coming onto the island of Okinawa. None at all. Simon Buckner Jr. was the commander of American forces. Well, here's kind of the weird thing. These guys start marching, right? And they just continue to march, and they aren't finding any resistance. I mean, that's almost like a vacation. They're having big barbecues and bragging about who has the best barbecue, and they keep marching, and there's no enemy to be fought. Now, they'll find them. But at this point, the strategy's way different. Did they hit them at the beaches? What are they going to do? They're going to hit them more inland, aren't they? But here's the thing. While they're waiting for them to reach them inland, the damage is coming by virtue of kamikaze pilots. And what they're going to do is they're going to assault these American ships that are where? Where are they docked? In the ocean surrounding Okinawa, right? So all of a sudden, as they're waiting for the American forces to get to them by land, the Japanese emperor is going to send kamikaze pilot after kamikaze pilot after kamikaze pilot, and they are going to blast American battleships, giving their life for the cause, right? Now, we're going to talk about early phases. In the first 48 hours of this Japanese operation, in the first 48 hours, more than 300 kamikaze pilots batter American ships that are in the waters around Okinawa. In the first 48 hours of these kamikaze assaults, 300 pilots will blast ships. Now, there's two ways Americans can defend themselves from these kamikaze pilots, these battleships. What are the two ways they can do it? How they defend themselves? Kids, easy. Go ahead. They'd shoot at them. They have guns and they'd shoot at them. And also they'd send American pilots up to be engaged in what we call dogfights with these What's the difference though? Do you think these Japanese pilots have any problem running into an American plane and No, they don't have any problem. American pilots realize they have to maybe give up their life, but they're not volunteering it. So we're at a disadvantage there. So all they can do in defense is fire these guns up at these planes and then send American planes to engage in dogfights. Well, in the first 48-hour period of this kamikaze attack, 3 American battleships are sunk and 15 other are damaged. During the first 48 hours of these kamikaze assaults, 3 American battleships are sunk. Battleships are big things. To sink one, you have to do some damage. 3 were sunk, and 15 other were damaged by these kamikaze pilots. Now, that battle started when? April 1st. By the end of April of 1945, concerning this kamikaze attack, by the end of April of 1945, it was estimated that 30 sailors a day were killed by Japanese kamikaze pilots. 30 a day. So between April 1st and the end of April 1945, it was estimated that 30 sailors per day were being killed by Japanese kamikaze pilots. Now, I told you about those 3 battleships that were sunk. Probably the most notable, I don't have to write it down, you can write it down, was the USS Bunker Hill. The USS Bunker Hill. And it was one of the 3 hit and killed approximately 600 sailors on board when that kamikaze pilot hit that ship and sunk it. The USS Bunker Hill was hit during this time, and it killed approximately 600 sailors on board. Now let's talk all in all. When we talk about all these kamikaze attacks during the Battle of Okinawa, they estimate that about 1,900 Japanese pilots were involved. How many survived? 0. That's the idea, right? 1,900 were involved. About 1,900 were involved during this entire campaign. And when the smoke cleared at the end of the Battle of Okinawa, 26 American ships were sunk and 164 were damaged. Okay, by the end of the time the smoke cleared on these kamikaze assaults, 26 ships sunk and 164 damaged. And you understand the difference in the first 48 hours, 3 sunk and how many damaged? 164. But by the end of the whole thing, 26 ships were sunk and 164 were damaged. So that's what's happening as we are moving towards the Japanese defense line. Does that make sense? So our soldiers are kind of joking around. Where's the enemy? Have we landed on the right island? They continue to march. And finally, they reach an area known as the Shuri Line. The Shuri Line. So they march and march and march, and they take all of this airfields and take all this land, and pretty soon they hit the Shuri Line. And guess what's at the Shuri Line? All of those Japanese. Okay? And it's kind of a weird deal because picture this. It's a bunch of rolling hills, so to speak, or mountains, right? Rolling summits. And where are the Japanese? They're behind them, looking over at us. Can we see them coming up? They have tremendous defense areas back there. So when we start marching up towards this Shuri Line and try to get the high ground, there's going to be the assault we're talking about, not on the beaches, but at the Shuri Line. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Just like we went to Fort Phil Kearny and we had that battle of Fetterman Massacre where they just slid right. Good analogy. They slid over the top of those little hills and we couldn't see them. Now, here's the key to this whole thing. This Shuri Line was 8 miles wide, the width of the island. So this Shuri Line was the complete width of the island. And we are marching up to this Shuri Line with American troops trying to take the high ground. That's the idea. So do you understand the difference? Instead of hitting us at the beaches, they let us get inward quite a while and secure some ground, but they're defending the back end of the island. Because it's our goal to push the Japanese completely out of the island, right? Clear to the Pacific Ocean and then attack mainland Japan. That's the plan. Okay? So here's where we're at. Now, they were firing mortars at us. You know what mortars are from there? They're a tube, and they're a shell about this big, and you drop them in the tube. It hits the bottom of the tube, and explodes and sends the mortar out, and it's pretty explosive. It'd be like hand grenades doubled. Okay? Well, during the time we're trying to get this assault of this Shuri Line, they estimate the Japanese are firing 1 mortar per second at us. 1 mortar per second. Can you imagine that? Marching in that, 1 mortar per second. Well, on this Shuri Line there were 3 summits. And the most important one was known as Sugarloaf Hill, the most western of the summits. And in order for the Americans to take the high ground and get to the top of the Shuri Line, they had to conquer Sugarloaf Hill. Sugarloaf Hill had to be taken. So there's 3 summits on the Shuri Line. The most western known as Sugarloaf Hill. And in order to break the Shuri Line, American soldiers are going to need to secure that hill. So on May 12th of 1945, Americans begin their descent upon Sugarloaf Hill. May 12th of 1945, they begin their assault of Sugarloaf Hill. And the higher they climb, the more what they get at them. They get more fire. Okay? So, the more they climb, the higher they ascend, the more fire they receive. Now, on the first day, on May 12th of 1945, half of the American soldiers that were involved in that campaign were killed or wounded. Half were killed or wounded on the first day of fighting. Now, so that's the first question somebody says, 250,000. We have 500,000 on the island. Are they all fighting at the same time? Remember the Easy Company went up to the top of Iwo Jima, there's probably 45 guys. So all these companies go. So obviously that's a good question, Josh. Most kids think that. We said all 500,000. Well, we didn't. They were doing other things. But the company that was sent, half of them were killed in the first day of fighting. 2 days later, on May 14th, we make another run at Sugarloaf Hill. Make another run. On May 14th of 1945. In those 2 days of fighting, there was little or no progress made and 400 Marines killed. Little or no progress made with 400 Marine deaths in the first 2 days. Now this is a weird thing to picture. During those first 2 days of fighting, the crest of that hill changed hands 11 times. Japanese had the crest. Americans fought, they took the crest. Japanese fought back, they took the crest. Back and forth. It changed hands 11 times in those first 2 days of fighting. 11 times. Sometimes these soldiers were as close as 25 yards from each other, and the crest changed hands 11 times. Finally, kiddos, after 10 days of fighting, Sugarloaf Hill is captured by the Americans, and the high ground is secured. After 10 days of fighting, approximately, we secure Sugarloaf Hill and gain the high ground. So what will be our next move after we secure that ground? What's the next move? What are we doing next? We're going to push them and push them and push them straight to the Pacific. Unfortunately, on May 21st of 1945, towards the latter days of victory, we get the rainstorm we've never seen before at Okinawa. Unbelievable rain.